So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, a refined Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu chapter 1:8, the 61st, we understand then the holy city is returning in the first holy city on the land of Cush, precisely as Prophet Yeshayahu prophesied. We understand then the land of Cush is in northern Sudan, where then the first holy city should be built. And then the world is obviously going through the first transition from where the nations they scandalized themselves for truly more than 1,000 years. But from the holy instructions we find then that set period of time of influence and forward motion was given within the 1,000 years of deceit and ended in 2009. But let's then evaluate what's going on with the world, and then as we read, let's try to find absolutely 100% proof where then the system of the end then should be on top. Firstly then, let's evaluate Revelation. Revelation chapter 1:8. As it was explained before and many times, when we read the holy instructions, there are no chapters and verses. The Codex, as we know of, was obviously not part of the Eastern culture of the Hebrews. They used to write the holy instructions on Megillas. First you find Galal or Galals, if you try to understand then plural in English. And then when you have writing on both sides or a side of a Galal, then you have a Megillah. Fairly simple understanding. Because of these, let's try to understand this particular chapter, chapter 1:8, absolutely related with the time of the restoration period. It doesn't pertain to the autumn feast, neither the spring feast. It was given as a result, as then the Creator himself, speaking through his prophet, and then giving us understandings regarding then the cities of the Messiah while during this time of the restoration, explaining come out of the system, explains very precisely on the 4th verse. And then as he explains this portion of it, then you find later on the 9th verse and beyond, it states, "And the merchants of the earth wilt mourn over her, because no one purchases their cargo." It's extremely important section because it shows us 100% sure that this world must become interlinked with many systems, primarily linked with the system of China. The e-trade must yet become familiar and very popular in every nation of this planet. Thus then, obviously coming the period of the Dragonic period, so then we understand why the precision of a computer must be absolutely in every nation. But not only this, what is going on as far as we can understand the movement of forward motions per period of time. Let's give an example. Daniel, the 2nd chapter, explains the statue, and then the king had a dream. Daniel obviously did understand the dream and revealed and explained. We are during the time of the base of the statue. So let's try to understand a point of Daniel. He was explaining then the many parts of the statue, and the first was the head of gold, the second portion of the statue, the chest and arms, was then of silver, and then the other section was of bronze, and then iron, and then a mixture of iron and clay was then the base of the statue. Let's try to understand a point. While the statue was active from the legs and above, obviously would have a specific nation leading the world. You find the head of gold was Babylon, then you find the Middle Persians, and then so on and so forth until you find the legs of iron. It was Rome. Then became the base of the statue, where iron does not mix with the clay. So Daniel previously had a very easy understanding, because he knew a nation would lead the world. But then the base of the statue was then a mystery. It came out of this routine of a nation leading. He saw there was iron and clay mixed up together, and he wanted to understand how are they going to play together, since there are nations iron and other nations as clay. So he set himself to pray and fast. And then the 10th chapter revealed that China was then the leader of the time of the end because of trade. And it is directed link with the sons of Ishmael, because they were the first regarding the presence of the Creator himself, and then they established trade, caravans. From this prophecy, then the Messiah simply explained to his people in the very near future, because we understand the Chinese system is already obviously leading United States, and then only lacks the icon of investment. It must be obviously a very careful plan, have these then set straight. And then because of the situation of chapter 1:8, then his people are warned of these understandings, because it's leading towards the autumn feast. So then we shift Revelation, and then we read sections of Daniel. What went on during the time of the 1,000 years of deceit? After 1009, there was then the phrase, the New World Order. Obviously, the holy cities were no more. They couldn't lead the world as they should be led. Then the 1,000 years of deceit came. The first 800 years was led by United Kingdom, or then England, and then the other couple of hundred years was led by America. Those were the focused point during this time. But then we are no longer during the time of deceit. We are back on the holy instructions as a path for the time of the end. Because of these, what can we understand as far as the son of Ibrahim, Ishmael? His influence as a trader, as a merchant, must return. Not only this, but then the second son, Yitzhak, then tabernacling, must lead as they used to lead in the past. So then, as far as we can understand, U.S. then is involved in many fronts of war in the Mideast. The situation is, every aspect of the situation is against U.S. Every and completely. There is not a single situation related with the war that will benefit U.S. The only situation is that they are linked with, for instance, Bitcoin, and the USD must be linked also with the system of China. And then the virtual systems, as they adopt to some sort of a standard such as USD, then they're going to be able to get some of the wealth they are wishing for, but it won't be through war. Amazingly, it won't be through war. It's because of what China is doing. But then, prior of coming to the 11th chapter of Daniel, let's understand then the despised one, spoken of then by Daniel the prophet. Then he explains very precisely, chapter 11 and verse number 21. Then explains then the combat, explains of an anger. And a few wilt be broken, but not in anger, but in combat. And it shall stand in his place a despised one. So then, we understand very simply the extension of the 1,000 years of deceit. The West is trying to do what they always used to do: fight against the other nations, trying to implement other systems. Back then, during the time of the 1,000 years of deceit, if they did this, it wouldn't have any consequence because there was no other system to be implemented at the time. But this time, China has the top trade system in the own country of US. China leads. What is then the understanding of this? They can't do any more trade using force. They must understand the new trade system. But then most of the culture of US, as far as we can understand it from the older times, they yet store their money under the pad. And this understanding no longer pertains to our time. Our time has evolved. Systems are absolutely fast. They have to learn computer systems. But they cling on to that piece of paper money and they want to do their way. There is no more time for this. In the future, people wanting to have paper money, they have to pay extra for it, because it is expensive printing money. So then, understandably, the despised one then is obviously mentioned in these instructions. Firstly, because simply the world won't anymore use the USD and pay for others' wars. That's why US is so quickly on mixing themselves with conflicts, because the USD pays for it. But if they were using themselves only the USD, it was fine. But nations in the world, they are using the USD. And then they have to get their money from the exchange. Thus then, nations dependent upon the USD, they have to pay for the war. Whereas then, if they were doing trade with China and shifting their system of monetary values towards the Chinese, then they would be able to hide themselves behind this very dangerous period of time. But then, even United Kingdom was drawn into this scoundrels' skirmish. Amazingly, very amazingly, they are involved. They want to strike also the Islamic State. So then I was thinking, always a gentleman. Understandably, Mr. Cameron is trying to be part of the new front of war. But let me ask you this. What is the outcome of these wars if the very economical system of Great Britain is then recuperating from the last blunt crisis? Are they going to join with the Americans and then try then to dominate the world once more? They won't be able to do this. Firstly, Taliban is also involving themselves in Afghanistan. There are a few German people that are then obviously being threatened with death. In the country of the Philippines. And then there were threatening actions made in New York regarding the subway system, and so on and so on and so on. So, is this truly going to work? Most amazingly, as it was explained before, firstly, US and the Western leaders, they were thinking of a quick airstrike. Now it has changed from quick to years of strike. It was already said before, US wants to permanently stay at war. And there was arms galore, arms for sale, and then arming this group, arming the other group, and arming this and then the other. And Islamic State has promised of doing the work also in Egypt, as it was then explained many times before, as we read the holy instructions regarding the Kingdom of the North. The Soviet Union must return and do their duty. The Soviets must make a deal with Egypt. They must give them arms to stabilize the Egyptian economy, so then China can do its work. But let's read these for a moment. And then explains, and silver and gold and went to exile. Then the understanding of these, verse number 8, it does not mean the gold and the silver went into exile. Because of the Gentile level, simply the grandiose place of Egypt was placed aside for a moment. But the Kingdom of the North must make a deal with Egypt regarding arms. If they don't do this, the situation with the Soviets is going to be extremely dangerous, because US is trying to once again by force staying on top, and China won't let. If China wants to get done away with the US, they simply don't export any more products, and then US would halt. And then the balance of the situation at the moment is resting with the Soviets. They must make a move. Mr. Putin must start speaking with then the Egyptian president and make a deal regarding arms. When this gets done, then the other situations, they become clearer. As long as there is this truly big, huge skirmish from the Islamic State and US, then the whole situation becomes cloudy. The only point is China via trade is coming very near. And the largest question to ask is this: can these nations of the West pay for this very expensive, firstly was then a quick war, and now it's war for years? Do they have enough resources for years of wasting of resources? This war in the Middle East won't end, and the situation is prone to get worse. And these nations of the West are going to invite themselves people not of their own, and it's going to cause a lot of trouble. So then, the explanation of these situations was clear. And what would be then a positive remark of solution? Very simple. Securing areas in many of these places for the civilians, and only standing guard against those people. Truly, the problems with the nations of the Middle East most of them are related with the United States and their foreign policies. The other countries, they have not much to do with it. But then the U.S. wants to drag the others along. This truly shows us the importance of each nation, then watching what China is doing, and then have an example from them. Obviously, U.S. should sit down and explain some of these situations with the Arab nations and try to come up with a solution for these. Obviously, Iran is also importantly involved with it. And then the ability of producing electricity by using nuclear means. Also very important. So then, China. What can we expect of China? More deals with many nations, as Spain already made more than 10 deals with China this last few hours. And nations are making deals everywhere. And China is becoming prominent and prominent and prominent. When the icon of investment becomes available, or the third step, then the question is, how can the nations do what China is doing? And what can a nation give system-wise products or resources in the system so then others can invest in themselves? Or each country then giving the products or then place them for sale, how can then they invite more investors? The situation is, what can a person invest in the United Kingdom? What can a person invest in the United States? What can a person invest then in France, Germany, Australia, New Zealand? If you invest in China, instantly you have a huge data of products you can invest on. So they understand the discrepancy of where the West is at and where China is at. And the holy instructions are explaining very precisely of each trade. High knowledge, trade, and then merchants. Revelation does not even speak of kingdoms anymore. It speaks of cargo and ships and merchants and freighters. Next time I'm going to evaluate more of these merchant ships and then come up with even more evidence of this time of the restoration period, where then the sons of Ishmael must be part of it, as the promise was given them. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.